Hey guys, I'm John Michael Weaver, and today I'm bringing you a Skype video call that I had with Chris Green, the service program director at Buckhead Church, one of the campuses of North Point down in Alpharetta, Georgia, near Atlanta. And this guy is just brilliant when it comes to all things creating great experiences in church. And I want to get into this interview. Do want to apologize for the video quality and a few audio issues. And unfortunately, it's my first time doing the Skype interview thing and recording it. But I really do believe that what he has to say is just golden, and I believe it's going to be valuable for everyone who watches. So check it out. I'm on the phone today with Chris Green, and just really wanted to share this video with anybody out there who could find some value. Chris is working at Buckhead Church, one of the branches of North Point, and doing an incredible job. I got the privilege this fall to go out there during Catalyst in Atlanta and get to see what they're doing and experience the service. And really, I'm not exaggerating when I say I believe you guys are really kind of leading the charge in the church world for creating these kinds of environments where unchurched people love to attend, and where creativity just really abounds. And so why don't you just let everybody know a little bit about yourself, if you're comfortable, just kind of who you are and what brought you to where you are today.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in Atlanta here. I went to the University of Georgia. Had a long time. I've had one girlfriend in my life who eventually became my wife, and married her. I've got a quiver full of children by this point. I have three little girls at home, and having a great time doing that. But coming out of school, I actually worked in the private sector. I was kind of in the stockbroking industry, commercial real estate, securities. But I was volunteering at a local startup church, which at the time was called Buckhead Church. And when I went for the very first time, I was blown away by what a small environment they had, but how incredibly powerful this tiny little place was. How they thought about all the details. And coming from the church world here in the South, where there is literally a church on every corner, it kind of blew me away because I had seen so many different styles of churches. So as I volunteered, I joined the production team kind of on a Sunday where they asked for additional volunteers. I jumped in, and I'm kind of a background musician, kind of a jack of all trades, but a master of none. So I joined the team, the audio team, and I was running the band's in-ear monitors on the audio side. Over time, I developed a skill set mixing front of house. And so then as a volunteer, they moved me out to front of house to help their staff guy, give him a break every now and then from running every service. At the time, we were doing 5 services, 9 a.m., 11 a.m., 1 p.m., 5 p.m., and 7 p.m. And it was just a lot for a staff person to do on a Sunday. So to make a short story longer, they offered me a job to mix, and I thought, well, mixing music is a lot more fun than selling stocks and bonds. So why don't I just go and try this? At the time, my wife was working, so it didn't seem like that big of a jump for me. But I came on staff at Buckhead Church. I mixed for about 15 months. A music director position opened up, and I was continuing enjoying mixing, and then they basically forced me to be the music director at the church. So I did that for 2.5 years, and then when we opened up an additional campus here at North Point, some of our current staff went and worked over at North Point, and so I took over the entire program here, the programming director role, which is over music production, guest services, and the programming features. Sorry, that was really long.
No, it's perfect. It's
Yeah.
it's huge. People just understanding where you're coming from and stuff. And
hmm
you're like one of the most humble guys that I know when it comes to like not name dropping and telling everybody where you're from and how big your church is and that kind of stuff. But I mean, you guys are doing it in some incredible ways. And so no, I appreciate that. It's great to hear your background and stuff. Maybe just kind of give us a little bit of sense. What drives you? I mean, would you say you're kind of in your sweet spot right now? I mean, you're enjoying what you're doing.
Yeah.
But what drives you? What excites you about what you do right now?
Well, that's a great question because I feel like that changes a lot. The way I'm wired, I'm very ambitious. I love solving problems. And as I've taken on different roles on my team, because if you look at the scope of my team, there's 10 of us, 11 of us on my programming team. And I've actually been at the bottom of my team as kind of like the assistant to the audio guy. I've been the music director, and then I've also, been able to lead the team. So what's driven me has changed, but it's always been the same. I just love solving problems. And right now, Christianity is at an interesting place in culture where we're trying to solve the problem of how do we get this next generation of people engaged with Jesus. And different churches skin it and do it different ways. And we have our way, which we don't believe is the way, it's just a way. And so right now, what energizes me is discovering how can I leverage this amazingly talented team, this great budget, this great place, and really solve all the problems I can by getting people connected to Jesus.
Totally, that's huge, man. And I think that's a big part of a lot of us out there in the creative world are kind of asking the question of where do I fit in the church? I think in the past, the church hasn't always been the quickest to really step out and say, hey, man, we can take what culture is doing and this creativity and art and dance and various things like that, and we can use it in the church world. And so I guess I'd love to hear from you. What do you think is happening next? And maybe a later question in some ways, but what do you feel like is happening next in the church? Maybe it's what's happening next for you guys, but as you look at the church overall, as you look at creativity and its place in ministry and in propelling the gospel, what do you think is next? Where are we going?
Yeah, well, that's a question I think we're asking a lot, and I'm sure it's a question you're asking in Montana a lot. And I think the answer to that question isn't a macro answer. I think it's probably a micro answer. It's what's next for your community, because what's next for us in Atlanta, maybe not what's next, for people in Montana or California or New York. I think it's really based on what community you're in. Now that churches are online and have TV, it's a little bit more of a macro answer, but to try to knock an answer out, I think what's next is less on what we're doing in the programming world, but what message are we sending to our communities? I think what we're seeing from the pastoral standpoints are, a little bit more of a gray area in the moral boundaries, and this is a little bit of an interesting answer, but I think pastors are getting more savvy at being careful not to alienate people early in the conversation, and there's a lot of controversy there. So from a programming standpoint, I think what we want to be getting better at is making our church an amazing place for anyone in society, no matter what your race, nationality, sexual preference. We want you to know that no matter where you're coming from, you have a place here. And I think what's next for us is getting better and better at communicating that in our programming, in our welcomes, in our music, because there's a conversation to be had about all of those details later, but it's not what we want to have up front. Right now, we want to get to know you. We want to tell you that we're happy you're there. And what's next for us is getting better and better and better at creating a place where anyone in the world can show up and feel welcomed and warm. And that is going to be different for the local church because that is not our reputation.
Yeah, I hear you. And I appreciate you fielding that answer because that was kind of a quick hit at you. But no, that's huge. And I love that is something it's tough for churches to even begin to think about that because it starts getting uncomfortable, but it's important. And I love that it's not just a matter of what we say, but it's a matter of everything that we do. It's from the front door, as Andy says, you start preaching the sermon in the parking lot, and I think that's huge that you guys are doing that. So as you're thinking about crafting creative experiences, because I kind of came to you and said, hey, I'd like to know how you guys do creative environments, and you kind of turned it and said we create experiences, and I think that's huge because that really encapsulates much more than one single aspect of an environment. So what would you say, why is creating or crafting creative experiences important to the church today?
Right. Well, I think as Americans, we're all getting savvier and savvier at picking up on the subtleties of experiences. If you think about Disney World, it's pop culture now to understand how Disney World does what they do, not just what they do and why they do it. And so I think we're all getting better and better at picking up on what's there. Well, as our vocabulary in that world increases, even throughout the mainstream culture, like my mom, who knows nothing about what I do, she still has an understanding of environments and experiences. To pause for a second, think about American Idol and the impact that the show American Idol has had on culture. This show subconsciously taught every American how to judge a singer. It taught you what to listen for, what to look for, performance indicators, how their pitch was. And what America created on accident is a mainstream population who knows how to judge singing. Well, that's a new feature of society that was kind of came with being an American. Well, that's happening all throughout the production world. You've got The Voice now, you've got well, geez, you could just name any show, and they're teaching you how to create experiences and the science behind performance. So with that elevation and standard, we're having to continue to elevate on the front end our standards to say, how are new and engaging ways for us to experience people? Just on Easter, we, for the first time, brought in the 4D experience to our Easter services. We actually piped a scent into the room to increase an experience for people because we thought, well, that's potentially something that we could try to hit another sense. Subconsciously, we used a scent to reach another sense. That's kind of hard to say. But yeah, so for us, experience is everything, because in order for someone to fully engage, you have to think about every microscopic thing that may distract them from being able to engage. And so we have to get better and better and better at forecasting what those distractions might be, and then backfilling those with positive things.
So good. That's huge. How would you say the environment impacts an experience? I mean, you kind of already hit on that a little bit, but the experience goes beyond. In the church world, we typically think about content, we think about truth, and we think about whatever it might be in those ways, but we don't always pay attention to environment, and sometimes it's we're preaching a message through our environment that's contrary to the message we're trying to preach with our words. And so how would you say environment impacts the experience for a person, coming into your church or any given church?
Yeah, well, I think the most beneficial degree someone can get if you want to be a programmer is probably a dual degree in psychology and sociology. And I think that's really what we ultimately are as programmers. We're psychologists and we're sociologists. And the reason I say that is we need an understanding of culture and the impact that culture has on the actual person. For example, if I want Andy, Stanley, to do a message, imagine Andy doing a really awesome content heavy message in this really like dark and awesome place. That comes with a feeling attached to that, where there's maybe just a single beam of light and he's talking right into the camera. So the single beam of light is bringing a very singular focus to Andy's presence. His eye contact into the camera is actually looking looking at you in the eye. But so say the impact of that message environmentally is very strong because it's personal, because we thought about the eye contact into the camera lens equals eye contact into the eyes of your viewer. And the single beam of light is directing all attention to one spot. So all we're doing in that one environment is channeling someone's focus right into the camera, which is directly into the soul of the viewer. So if I take that same man and I put him on a pulpit with a wide shot, and all you see in the background is everything's lit. It's almost like we just flip the lights on in the room, do the exact same content. And how does it land? It's way different. Where his focus is left and right, because he's talking to this audience everywhere. And so just changing the environment that he's in changes the impact of his message. So I think if we want to get really good, we have to think about all of those details, because great content in a poor environment is weaker content. So if we put great content in an amazing environment, we've hopefully removed every distraction and forecasted how it's going to land best. And I think that's our goal.
So one of the things I'm really trying to learn about right now is in the area of stage design, and it's something I got to see from you guys. There's a few websites out there, and even some of your guys' stuff is out there, pictures and instructions and what you're doing. So maybe we talked environment in an overall sense, and lighting is a huge part of that, and and what you do with the stage is a huge part of that. So maybe on both sides, when it comes to stage design, when it comes to your lighting, how do those aspects play in on a practical level to the environment or the experience that you're creating?
Yeah, well, stage design is one of my weaker elements. It's something I'm not very gifted at doing personally. I've done several things on our team. Stage design is, I'm so thankful we have a lot of great guys in our organization who specialize in this, so I can just giggle when they do a great job. So I'll just admit right out of the gate, that's not something I'm like exceptional at doing. There's not a lot actually, but I can talk a big game. But our stage design is kind of that same element. I think one of our goals is for people to walk in the room and stage design gives off that first impression. It's that wow. I mean, it's one of the first things they see when they walk in, and they're not expecting to see it. It's just something that they take in. And so, thinking about stage design, some churches I've noticed, maybe don't think about stage design, and so what they're missing is that first impression that they can have on someone, by not thinking about, casting shadows on purpose and maybe creating a depth on stage and lighting it, very thoughtfully. Yeah, stage design is texture, it's wow, it's all that stuff, and it creates personality as well. I love geometric, things that are just so clean and they make sense to the human brain. Just spacing and patterns and that type of thing. I don't love the abstract, busy stage designs. I love things that make sense. Maybe that's my personality, my hardwiring, but I tend to think that we land in that. Let's do something that's creative and beautiful, but not like busy and distracting. Because the last thing we want is Andy talking and trying to grab all the focus, but all you can focus on is all the weird stuff happening on the stage behind him. So if you notice the North Point sets, hopefully most of the time they're very clean, they're very deep and textured, but they're not grabbing your attention. We want them to be really good, but we don't want them to be more important than what Andy is talking about.
And would you say that's the lighting, the way you do lights, whether it's from the back or whether it's how you light those elements and how you light the stage? I mean, how would you say that plays into that process?
Well, lighting is one of the most magical features of any production. And the way that you illustrate that is, I don't know if you've ever walked into a beautiful venue that was just had its house lights on, like normal lighting on. It's so unimpressive. And I don't care how amazing the stage design is. If you walked into our Buckhead Church room on a Monday afternoon when we just have like the auditorium lights on, but no stage lighting on, you'd be like, okay. But when we light it up strategically and with all that thoughtfulness on Sundays, it's a completely different zone. It's almost a magical land, and there's depth and there's features and it's a mystical and mystique place. It's just all it's lighting is everything. And I know it's a bummer for churches because lighting fixtures are incredibly expensive, but there are ways to get around that.
Absolutely. What would you say in the process, I mean, of considering your experience? How do you work this? This is another one of those questions I haven't really sent your way, but what's your process of considering what we do and how we do it and what that looks like? And what do you, I mean, you have a team, obviously, like you said, you've got people who are giving input on different areas maybe where they might not be your strengths. So what does that process look like for you?
Mm-hmm. So to make sure I understand your question, you're asking what kind of how does our team approach programming, just in general, and what's that process?
When it comes to the environment that you set.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the most, like I said, I think the degree that you get in college, if you're trying, is psychology and sociology, because I think what's really important is for you to understand the community around you. I think it's important to understand the cultural elements that drive that community. It's important to know the language that drives that community. It's important to know the baggage that's in that community. You have to know your community because that's a fundamental core feature. It's a prerequisite to programming. If you were just to walk in fact, I went to Spain a few years ago and they're like, teach us a class on programming, and I'm like, oh no, like I can't because I don't fully understand the culture of Spain. Like, how could I teach you how to program in Spain? So instead, what we did was we gave them a list of questions to ask themselves and walked away because we had no idea how to teach a different culture than ours here in Atlanta. So what we want to get to first is understanding what our win is. And, if you've read North Point books or Andy's books, that's a core feature of what we do is understand the win. Because a lot of times when you don't know what to do, you're looking for fruit. And the fruit of what we do is the win. We may not know what to do, but we know what it looks like when it happens. So then we try to reverse engineer from there. So what's the win? Well, the win, let's say in the first 5 minutes, is that we want people to feel a sense of wow, a sense of energy, enthusiasm. We want them to clap loud after whatever we do. Well, that's going to help us drive the type of song that we might select. It's going to help us drive, the recognizability of the song. There's a lot of things that get answered when you know what you're trying to accomplish. And more importantly, there's a lot of the things that you know not to do when you know what you're trying to accomplish. We have an example of that we're doing for this upcoming Sunday here. We had a really artistic and awesome song that was presented to us from some of our team members. And the problem is it didn't accomplish our win. It was beautiful. It was amazing. Everything about it was awesome and artistic, and people would love it. But what we wanted to accomplish was an energetic roar applause at the end. That's the energy, the feeling we wanted. What they had created was a bit of something that might create a golf clap. Well, imagine how the welcome host who's coming up next feels having to walk out to a, and that was good, man. That was good. We wanted to be like, yeah, that was amazing. Well, to get that, you've got to do a different song, with different production and stuff. So you got to understand what your win is. But you can ask that question for each moment of your service. What's the win for this moment? And then how do we transition to get there and out of there? Does that help?
That's almost where this whole thing begins, is understanding, your mission, what you're trying to accomplish, your wins, and that's where I think that's where the conversation begins. And then you brought up contextualizing, for your environment, for your culture, and if every one of us tried to be North Point, not only would we fall miserably flat, but we would be reaching a culture that's not necessarily our own. We'd be trying to do something that's not necessarily fitting with where we're at. And there's a ton that we can learn, and that's a cool thing. I mean, there's just transportable principles there. So when we think of someone who's looking at this whole process and thinking about, okay, all right, experience is important. Okay, I get it. An environment and all those things are valuable. How does a church who hasn't really put any emphasis on that before, who hasn't maybe thought about it, how do they begin really going through that process of crafting those creative environments or experiences?
Yeah, that's the question that I think any church gets the most, which is, okay, we want to do that, but how do we do it on our scale? And it's a very difficult thing to answer because, and someone asked me this yesterday. I actually had a call with a friend in Michigan who's a church planner who's trying to do similar things to all of us. We're all trying to just get to what's next. And I found myself answering that same question, which is, I think it takes a ridiculous amount of discipline. Because what's tempting is to just throw in the towel and say, this is the best we can do with what we've got. Sweet. And, I think if you recall, like, even North Point had its start, right? It was underfunded in a tiny place with no one coming. So what was different about that experience is that Andy was so disciplined to the core principles and was so consistent about those principles that he said no to a lot of things. So what does that look like if you're a band? Well, if, say, your core of your band, you have a great singer and maybe a great guitar player, and everyone else is not quite there yet on their instrument. Well, what that looks like is maybe every week all you're doing is acoustic-led worship with those two musicians until you build up a consistency with that or train up other people that can fill in the other pieces. That's what that looks like. And it causes discipline because that's a lot of tough conversations, because you're telling a bass player who really, really wants to play with you, yeah, here we got a vision for what we want. Right now, I think this is our strongest core, and this is what we're going to go with for a while. We really love you, but we're not ready yet to bring that in. And that's that type of discipline to the principles that you're there. If you're doing lighting and stuff, I think it's maximizing. It doesn't take much to create a great stage look. All you're doing is shutting out the lights, and you're figuring out where to focus your attention with these lights. It's not that difficult, and I don't think it's that expensive. I've seen so many small churches create amazing set designs using PVC pipe and some, what's that stuff they put over the lights? What do they call that?
Right.
That little corrugated plastic. Yeah. Just by lighting corrugate. Yeah, Coroplast. Thank you. So it's like, you see churches do amazing things on tiny budgets. It's just a matter of being disciplined and honest about what's actually good, because we kid ourselves into thinking everything we create is good. Well, that's a lie, and Lord knows everything I create, about 1% of it gets used. So anyway, whatever. And then the other factors, I think it just translates all the way through. You need someone who's brave and courageous to say no, and that's not good enough. And you've got to lean into that. We survey a lot. We get a lot of people to come in and say, what do you think about this? And that's, I think, what's unique about North Point is that we are ridiculous about evaluation. and we allow people to destroy everything we do because we know that the unchurched person walking in is more critical than anyone that's going to walk into our suite to tell us they like it or not. So if we're being honest, the unchurched person walking in is way harder than we're going to be on
Absolutely.
ourselves. So we might as well
Awesome.
be pretty
That's
hard
really
on
great.
ourselves.
So, I mean, that process, it's not just about the environment you create. I mean, you can pour all kinds of money, or you can do it on a cheap level and do something really creative. But you guys do more than just creating a nice stage design or good lighting or everything. You really go through a process of, like you say, programming. And so for people who are out there going, programming, what's that mean? Is that like code, that kind of thing? You're talking about service programming. Maybe unpack that a little bit and why that's important to the experience, that it's not just, hey, let's put up some scents and some different, lights and things, but really there's a plan, there's a process and everything that goes into it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that thoughtfulness about every detail, it sounds exhausting and it is exhausting. But I think it's crucial because, I mean, everyone watches Jimmy Fallon now. Everyone's getting their reference on society and culture and coolness based on Jimmy Fallon. And part of Jimmy Fallon is a core feature of what we believe about our communicators. And, I'm not going to say this is North Point's way. I'll say this is my own opinion. But I believe in the communicator world, we have to be honest about what the crowd wants. And honestly, what I think subconsciously happens is the people who are most successful at communicating have an aura of cool. Like there's an aspiration that, this person is someone I would like to be like. And if you're a communicator in your church for your hosting segments or pastors or main stage doesn't give off that aura of self-confidence and, coolness, you're starting at a little bit of a disadvantage. And so part of the stuff that we do here is coach our communication. We're also looking for communicators, upcoming young communicators who have that self-confidence that's not arrogant. It's just we want people to be like, you know what, I like that guy or that gal. I'd like to be like them. And if we start there, we're already in a winning role. From a programming standpoint, I used to have this saying, because I was so mind-numbing trying to create music because I wasn't that good at it as the music director. I had to create sciences so that I could figure out how to do a good job. We had the saying that was, what happens between the songs may be more important than what happens in the songs. And so I needed to prioritize for my bands that the way that you connect the two songs, the three songs together may be most important. Because if you pay attention to how you feel in music, when you do a hard stop after song one, change the key, have this awkward silence, and go, that actually ruins your flow. And most people go, that's just how it has to be. Not true. In fact, now we focus on actually doing songs maybe in the same key and maybe even closer to the same tempo so that we can glue all the songs together, because we know that stopping in between songs hurts us, doesn't help us. So how do you get rid of those stops? So it's really about a ridiculous amount of attention on small features, because those transitions between elements, how do you transition out of your host segment into your worship set? Have you thought about that? And if you're a video church where you have IMAX screens, have you thought about what your video director is going to be showing in that gap? And if you haven't, you're missing an opportunity. In fact, you're actually hurting yourself, because now you've got a down moment where people may disengage with what's happening or go, ooh, what was that? That's what we're trying to eliminate.
No, it was all good. I mean,
I
I
don't know
think
if I may have been in the weeds
I
on
think
that
it
one.
comes down
Sorry,
to, you
but
said, attention to detail, and it's really being intentional. Attention and intention. I think it's like those. You guys are working through all those things, thinking it through. We tend to do, like you said, good enough. We kind of just go, it's good enough for us, but we're not thinking about the people that we're really intending to reach. We talk about reaching unchurched people. We say we want to complete the Great Commission, and yet the way we're doing church in so many places isn't accomplishing it. And so I think when we're talking about environments, talking about experiences, we have to really think ahead of time, plan. I mean, you guys are planning months in advance for many things, and so we in a church culture that's kind of used to going, well, let's just flow with it. We just need to listen to the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit works months in advance. The Holy Spirit works in order, not in chaos. And so, no, it's really good stuff to hear. And so, we talked about, where does the church begin? What about that one person who's out there and going, okay, I'm the tech guy at my church, or I'm just a volunteer, running lights, and my church doesn't get it, my leadership doesn't get it. And this is kind of a bigger question than what I proposed before, but where does a person like that begin? Where do they approach, the situation, and how do they really begin to move and help to move the church forward? I know we don't always have that freedom, but in a place where maybe we're really looking to do something to kind of take our church forward in these areas we're talking about, where does a person begin?
Yeah, man, so many thoughts come to my mind with that. I think when I was in Montana last October, I remember someone kind of asking that question, and I just come off like a couple of experiences where I was trying to push some new ideas in my own organization, and realizing how poorly I'd handled that, because what I had done is walked into rooms with ideas and comments and forcefulness. And what I realized later, after some good friends said, hey, you know what? A better way to have handled that might have been to ask some really good
Mm,
questions, because self-discovery is a
absolutely.
more powerful journey than someone walking in and going, here's how it needs to be. So I think one of the ideas for someone who's maybe frustrated and wants to take
Mm,
it to the new level is to figure out some really great questions to be asking, and let whomever you're asking
so good.
come to a bit of a self-discovery of what you're trying to get them to think about. Some of that might be
Hmm.
showing a video. Hey, look at this. What do you think about this? Don't you think this is powerful? What could we think about doing our version of this? Those types of things where you're not going, we got to do this, man. We got to do this, because that anxiety actually shuts people down, especially people who may be older than you or more traditional than you are. We forget that sacred cows exist in our organization. And if you haven't heard the term sacred cow, that's just a tradition that people don't want to change. That could be the lighting in your room. It could be the music that you play. It could be so many different things. They exist everywhere. One of the pastors on staff here has added to that by saying sacred cows have bodyguards. And those are the people in your church who protect those traditions. And so the best way to get to attacking some of those changes is to ask really great questions,
Hmm.
and avoid the temptation to
Hmm.
go in cavalier and throw weight around when you may not have any weight. So that's one very important tactic, and one that I'm
So good.
currently learning.
That's great.
Um, yeah, I haven't figured that one out quite yet, but I'm getting there. The other thing, we talk about here, leading up. And leading up is just the concept that you may not be in a positional leadership area. You may not be the boss. You may just be a guy that works, or a gal that works on the team. So one of the ways you can lead up is you actually have to kind of build your own leadership skills,
Mm.
and which is funny about, because you may feel too young to have gone through that. But what you can do to simulate that is to do a really great job all the time, encourage people, and do not have a critical spirit. I think critical spirits, oh, I hate this. This sucks. Saying that stuff, repels relationships. And what you're ultimately going to do is leverage your positivity and your encouragement to get influence. And so one of the things I've noticed about church production people in my organization, all organization, is we have a bad reputation. Our reputation is that we're negative, that we have critical spirits. Yeah, that we're hard workers. We always get that accolade. But I think if we were to able to flip that script, and we would be the encouragers and say, hey, that's really good. You know what? I have an idea how we might even take that to a new level.
Yeah.
Starting with a statement like that is better than, that wasn't
So
good,
true.
man. We've got to do this. That angst repels that. So if you want to change things, be positive, ask great questions, and be consistently that way. Because over time, people are going to go, what do you think? I like you, and I like your
Absolutely.
ideas.
That's
What
just
do you
gold. That's
think?
that's
And
all
then
gold.
maybe you'll have an opportunity to actually create that
One last
change.
question to kind of throw in there a little bit is there are places out there going, well, hold up, this is North Point, this is Buckhead. They have this, and we're watching your videos and hearing and seeing what you guys are doing and going, man, I can't. There's no way we could do it on that level. You shared a few things. I mean, being able to do stuff on a budget, but um, well, how do you approach that when you're in a different place? And maybe it's not really easy to answer where you're at, but a person who's sitting out there going, okay, my budget is this, or man, I don't even know if I can, begin the process unless I do it from a real, cheap level. What do you say to someone like that? What do you say to encourage them?
Yeah. Well, we have a series that Andy did here called The Comparison Trap, and I think that's one of the downsides of social media. It's the downside of just a well-connected community, is that we completely and constantly compare ourselves to other churches, and then we have this natural envy. I have my own version of that in other places in the church community. I look at other churches and go, "Rrr, I wish we could do that." So, I mean, we all do that. It doesn't matter what station you are. Um, I think the answer to that is you've got to scale. You've got to scale things. And, I don't know what to say to the person who's just critical and can't get beyond that. But for someone who really wants to do it and figure it out, I think there's an ability to get beyond that criticism and that just that sulking about what you have and your resources, and figure out a way to get it done. Get that hunger and get a hungry spirit and go, okay, look, we can't do all the cool things and the dissolves and all the cool video stuff, but we can shut the lights out in our room, and we could put a couple of, washes on the wall, and we can create some depth. And that's not going to cost much. If I need to sell a couple of the crap things we have in the closet to buy a couple of inexpensive fixtures, because one of the benefits that smaller churches have is they have a smaller room, and smaller rooms are less costly. I have a 3,000 seat auditorium. Everything we do is expensive because we have to we have to figure out how to make a 3,000 seat auditorium cool, and it's expensive. So the ideas that we have can scale down and be just as powerful. And really, I think what we think about is, the details. And I think in a smaller room, get a couple of washes, shut the lights off. Just turn off the overhead lights, dim the room, make it feel better. If you just did that alone, you can create a completely different emotion.
Why do you think that is important, that darker environment? It just helps for some people who maybe don't get that.
Sure, multifaceted. Number one, we think, you have to remember our context. We're a church for the unchurched. We're not a church for grandma who's been a Christian for 50 years. That's not what we do. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's just not what we do. So one of the assumptions we make about our attendees are they would probably prefer to be a bit anonymous. They may be just testing the area. So a darker room helps people to be anonymous. It helps them not to feel like there's a spotlight on them or that everyone in the world can see them. That's a really important subconscious feature of comfort. And so what we want people to do is walk in and, the brighter the room, the more just you can notice everything. Darker rooms help to hide things. So if you have some clutter in the corner, or you've got a wall that isn't as painted well, man, by shutting the lights off, you can't see that. And so there's some features that you can create by just shutting the lights off. The lights seem to be sacred cow in an organization. There's some like theological connection to having a lot of lights on in these rooms. I don't know what that is. I would challenge those by asking really good questions, not by just challenging. But yes, the lights, create an emotion. I mean, think about just this. If I'm taking a photo, with my wife, I'd rather take that photo at sunset. Why? Because the light's warmer. And I can't explain to you why. What I can tell you is there's something about the way God made me. That warm, soft light is beautiful.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that is why. If you can tell me the science of that, then I can tell you the reason why a dark room is better. But a bright, cold light that's just everywhere, there's no shadows, there's no depth. It just feels like a hospital room. And who enjoys a hospital room? No one. And who knows, maybe subconsciously when we see that, we think of the school that we went to, or we think of all the other government buildings we've been in, and emotionally we go there, whereas darker rooms take us to more romantic restaurants we've been in, and they take us to places that we've had good feelings.
That we use, and
long-winded answer, but
same sort of thing. But everything you're saying is right there. It's just one of those things that face, in small church America, like, well, we've always done it this way. We've always had the lights on, and we've always whatever it is. And as soon as I hear "we've always," I'm like, well, let's do the opposite. That's just kind of, I think young leaders tend to feel that way a lot of times. So I said that was the last question. There's one more here. What about that? I mean, I could talk for days, but you got stuff going on. But
I'm loving it.
What about that young person who maybe is either outside the church, or they've come into the church, or they're sitting there knowing that they've got creative gifts, creative talents, whether it's in technology, it's in arts, it's in music, and they're sitting there going, how does what I have, how is that useful for the church? And in a church that's using creatives or makers, is kind of another word that's running around out there. How do you reach out to that person? What do you say to that young person who's trying to figure out how what they do or what they're gifted at can be used for God's glory in the church?
Yeah. I have an interesting view of that because of what we do. We get a lot of people that want to engage with us just because our church is bigger. And so we get a lot of people who kind of say, I want to help, I want to help. And we actually don't take most of those people just logistically because we can't. We're kind of staffed up where we need staffed up, which is a great thing. And the problem that we have is that we have to say no a lot of people to a lot of people. But if you're in a church where there isn't that challenge and you're someone who wants to help, I think it's such an interesting way to approach this. But open-handedness to me is just it's a gift. It's a gift to an organization. It's a gift to a church. There's something about a humility about your gift. And I'm not saying, the bragging side. I'm talking about not being right about everything. Because you may want to bring your gift, but you want to do it on your terms, right? So what if your church is like, we love what you do, but we'd love for you to do it this way? And what I might challenge, people to do is say, why don't you do it kind of their way for a little while and then build up a rapport and then start to ask questions. And you're starting to see that theme kind of roll through almost all of my answers because young leaders, we have a reputation for being bulls in china shops. And we have reputations for being know-it-alls. We have reputations for, wanting just to do it our ways. And that's just part of being young, right? I mean, and I'm 34 now, which is hard to believe I'm saying that. But I'm coming out of that young season where now I'm seeing a new crop of younger guys and gals who are coming off like I did when I was, 24, 25. So what I would say is use your gifts, but do it with open hands and say, I just want to serve. I'm here to serve. If anything that I can do can actually help us get there, do it. And then when they give you the really terrible project, see if you can improve it, but without being cocky about it. But say, hey, I have an idea. Could I share that idea with you rather than I just did it this way because it's better. So there is this element of open-handedness that I think if we could just make that a part of the next generation of people,
Chris,
you'll
thank you
be
so
10
much for
years
that.
ahead of where I
That's
was.
so good. I'm just
All
soaking
right,
it in, and I'm gonna go back and watch this video. But I appreciate you letting me record our conversation, be able to make it a resource for others who are asking these kinds of questions. Who are wondering, okay, how do we do this? And luckily, you guys are out there. Like I said, you're pioneering in this space, and we're blessed, honestly, to have a church and to have a leader like Andy, and especially someone who surrounds himself with people like you, teams who are gifted, who are able to work within their gifts to make the church a better place, especially a better place for those who aren't churched. And so, man, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to catching up again sometime soon. So that was our interview with Chris Green, and I hope that you learned a lot from it. I know that what he had to say really helped me. Sorry there at the end, it kind of got cut off, so we didn't get to really finish it out. Felt a little awkward there, but it was a great conversation, and I hope this is valuable to you. So you can take it and apply the truths that you learned in your context. Thanks, and have a great day.